Welcome. I'm Eric Fleming, host of A Moment with Eric Fleming, the podcast of our time. I want to personally thank you for listening to the podcast. If you like what you're hearing, then I need you to do a few things. First, I need subscribers. I'm on Patreon at patreon.com/A Moment with Eric Fleming. Your subscription allows an independent podcaster like me the freedom to speak truth to power and to expand and improve the show. Second, leave a 5-star review for the podcast on the streaming service you listen to it. That will help the podcast tremendously. Third, go to the website, momenteric.com. There you can subscribe to the podcast, leave reviews and comments, listen to past episodes, and even learn a little bit about your host. Lastly, don't keep this a secret like it's your own personal guilty pleasure. Tell someone else about the podcast. Encourage others to listen to the podcast and share the podcast on your social media platforms because it is time to make this moment a movement. Thanks in advance for supporting the podcast of our time. I hope you enjoy this episode as well. Hello, and welcome to another Moment with Eric Fleming. I am your host, Eric Fleming. And, hey, y'all, I'm 59 years old. I am 59 years old. Oh, wow. That's interesting, and I'll leave it at that. But we got a great show for y'all, man. This is going to be a powerful show. And I just really am honored that the people that have come on, a couple of the guests I met for the first time doing the interview, and they are powerful people. And then there's one brother who, I've known for quite a while, and was really glad to be able to touch base with him and have him come on. And I hope that y'all enjoy it. I think that y'all will really get something out of this particular podcast. But as always, before we get started, it's time for a moment of news with Grace G.
Thanks, Eric. President Joe Biden said the U.S. will respond after a deadly drone attack in Jordan by Iran-backed militants killed 3 U.S. soldiers and wounded 40. Alabama executed Kenneth Smith using nitrogen gas, marking the first execution by this method in the United States. Civil rights activists failed to persuade a federal appeals court to reconsider a ruling that may limit lawsuits enforcing racial discrimination protections under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. A Reuters Ipsos poll shows Donald Trump leading President Biden by 6 percentage points, with 40% to Biden's 34%. A Manhattan jury ordered Donald Trump to pay $83.3 million to E. Jean Carroll, who accused him of defamation by denying her rape allegation. President Biden described a border security deal as the toughest and fairest amid critical Senate negotiations, while House Speaker Mike Johnson said the deal is dead on arrival. Donald Trump joined a co-defendant's effort to disqualify Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis from his Georgia election interference case, alleging she injected race into the case. Peter Navarro, Trump's trade advisor, has been sentenced to 4 months in prison for contempt of Congress related to the January 6, 2021 Capitol attack investigation. U.S. federal prosecutors charged 195 people across 10 states with drug trafficking, including a narcotics ring operated by a California prison inmate. The U.S. Justice Department concurred with findings that former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo violated federal law by sexually harassing employees. The U.S. House Committee on Ethics dropped an inquiry into Representative Jamal Bowman's fire alarm incident after a censure and guilty plea. A former IRS contractor was sentenced to 5 years in prison for unlawfully leaking tax records, including those of Donald Trump. And The FBI reports that 1 in 10 U.S. hate crimes occurs at educational institutions, with Black, Jewish, and LGBTQ students as common targets. I am Grace G., and this has been A Moment of News.
All right. Thank you, Grace, for that moment of news. And now it is time for our first guest. And this is a major deal. Now, I have been very fortunate to have great guests on this podcast. And but it's kind of one of those things where, when you meet somebody that you can relate to on a lot of different levels, and then realize that they're heroic at the same time, right? So, without further ado, let me introduce Sergeant Aquilino Gonell. Aquilino Gonell came to the United States from the Dominican Republic as a young boy. Although he spoke no English, he dedicated himself to his adopted land, striving for the American dream. Determined to be a success story, he joined the Army to pay for college. He saw action in Iraq and returned home with PTSD. Believing in the promise of our government, he focused on healing himself and supporting his family. His hard work paid off when he landed a coveted position with the United States Capitol Police and rose to the rank of sergeant. January 6, 2021, changed everything. When insurrectionists stormed the Capitol, Gonell bravely faced down the mob attempting to thwart the peaceful transfer of power. The brutal injuries he sustained that day would end his career in law enforcement. But when some of the very people he put his life on the line to protect downplayed or denied the truth of that day, he chose to speak out against the injustice done to him and the country. Chronicling what it means to live a life of conviction, one that adheres to the best ideas of our democracy. His new book, American Shield, is a bold testament to the power of truth, justice, and accountability from a highly decorated officer, an immigrant who exemplifies the greatest aspirations of a grateful nation. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a distinct honor and privilege to have as a guest on this podcast, Sergeant Aquilino Gonell. All right, Aquilino Gonell. I hope I didn't butcher that too well, Sergeant. How you doing?
I'm doing good, and you said it good enough.
All right. So, first of all, let me just thank you for coming on the podcast. It is really, really an honor to have somebody that literally can have the word hero applied to them. You and the other men and women that served in the Capitol Police, even prior to January 6th, but during that particular day. And we'll get into a little bit about that experience in the interview, but I just want to thank you for that, man. I know you've gotten a lot of pats on the back and all that kind of stuff, but as somebody who has been an elected official before, somebody who was a sergeant at arms of a legislative body before, as somebody that's been in law enforcement, I just want you to know from the bottom of my heart, I really appreciate what you did and that you made it through. So,
No, thank you for those kind words, and I'm very humbled to hear you guys say those things. Like I tell many people, I just simply did my job, what I was supposed to do, and what I signed up for. I know that it was a extraordinary day, eventful day, but I don't feel like I did something major. I mean, obviously, a lot of people tend to disagree with but I humbly welcome, and I said those words, but I was just simply doing my job.
Yes, sir. And that's usually how most heroes say that. I was just doing my job. That's all I was doing. So look, at the beginning of the interview, what I usually try to do with a guest is I try to find a quote that either relates to the work that they're doing, something from what they've written, or something, that they may have said in an interview. And your quote is, "All it takes for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing." What does that quote mean to you?
It means that we shouldn't stay idle. When you see something wrong, you have to speak up. You got to take actions. Um, a lot of the very same people who I defended on January 6th, for example, privately they know that this person is a menace. The former president it's someone that put not only our very system of governance at risk, our own national security, their own life, our own democracy. And to this day, they privately they will say all those things, but publicly they have reservation about saying they contort themselves to excuse him, give him, condone his behavior, and don't even have the backbone to come forward and confront him, stand up for not only for themselves but for a country. And it's sad because on January 6th, these individuals, elected officials, they were running for their lives. And if it wasn't because the actions of officers like myself and my colleagues, a lot of them would have perished. A lot of them would have been killed, murdered right there at the Capitol. And to this day, they tell me I need to move on from that day, but they don't tell that to the same guy who orchestrated and set in motion the events on January 6th to put their lives on the line. And the only time that they come forward and say something negative or stand up to the president is when on their way out, when they're about to retire or when they're about to lose an election. And their courage, it's outstanding to me, the lack of it. But yet they want us, the officers or the other people, or let these other people do the work. Let them be the outspoken, because we don't need to put our lives on the line. Well, the guy put your life on the line and you still defending him, which is very shameful. And this is coming from a lot of individuals who claim and prophesy that they are the party of law and order, the party of rule of law. Tell me again how you are those things if you are defending the guy who sent the mob to destroy our country, our government, send the mob to kill all of them, and when you had the next three people in the line of succession to the presidency, the vice president, the speaker of the House, and the Senate Pro Tem, along with the other 400 plus members of Congress, both chambers, and they'll rather investigate the investigator rather than investigate the conduct and the behavior of that person. And it's very disappointing.
Yeah. And we'll get into that a little deeper because I'm going to do it like you did in the book. And the name of the book, y'all, is American Shield. We're going to plug it because all these questions are going to come from the book. And I strongly encourage people to get it so that you can understand a perspective of a particular officer. But it's a powerful book. And so I'm going to do the interview like you did the book. So in the introduction, you talked about silence was the blueprint that you had relied on most of your life. Why did you feel that way?
I always thought that, I was born in another country, the Dominican Republic. I arrived here in the United States in 1992 legally my father petitioned for me, and at that time it was granted. I had to assimilate. I had to adapt to the culture. I had to make my way uh, through this new country. And part of it was where I lived in New York. It was a lot of crime, a lot of robbery, murders, a lot of violence, and staying away from those things and keeping it to myself, not drawing attention, as I mentioned in the book American Shield. It's it was something that worked for me. Uh, you know, like I said, same but not making noises paid off for me to keep myself not only out of trouble but to continue my education to try to be better, and that's what I was trying to do. But later on in life, it was not doable for me to continue. So I began to be a little more spoken about certain things whenever I saw fit that I needed to speak up when it came to doing the right thing and not condoning any injustice.
So, like I mentioned, you did the book in two parts. Why did you feel compelled? Because you very easily could have just wrote a book about January 6th and been done with it, but you felt that you had to tell your life story up until that point. Why did you decide to write the book that way?
I wanted people to see and know all the sacrifices that I had done for this country. I mean, had it not been because of January 6th, I don't think anybody would know other than my family and my immediate relatives would know the sacrifices that I done for this country. I spent almost 17, almost 17 years as a Capitol Police officer and 8 as a member of the United States Army, and was not even born in this country. I got a lot of accolades, awards, certificates, promotions, and things like that. But that's out of merit, out of me doing the right thing, out of me doing what I was supposed to. So I wanted people to know my background, that whenever we come here to the United States as an immigrant, again, I was born here. Whenever you hear a lot of those things from the Republican side, the immigrants are coming over. The immigrants is an invasion. They only come here to leech off the government, so they're not contributing anything. And here I am, a legal immigrant that comes here, naturalized immigrant, who had checked each box of their criteria as an immigrant, of those immigrants that they want here in this country, and yet not a single one of them, except for Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, had taken the time to listen to me, to my story, to what I witnessed, especially on January 6th. So, they often say, we want immigrants that come to this country, assimilate. Well, I did that. We want a person, immigrant that comes here and better get an education. Well, I did that. You would want an immigrant that comes here, help like the community. Well, I did that. You would want somebody who's going to swear an oath and defend the Constitution of this country and our nation. Well, I did that. And even after going to Iraq to war, I came back and I swore an oath, a second oath, again, to become a police officer. And I defended the Capitol. I protected the Capitol for 17 years. And now that on the biggest attack of our country on January 6th, you have people that say, you know what, the rioters who attacked the Capitol, those are patriots. Those are hostages. Those people are political prisoners. And if I had to ask, if those people are those things that they say with those connotations, then who are we, the police officer who defended the Capitol on that day? What is our role? Were we the bad guy in this story? well, I know in my heart that we were there protecting the Capitol. We had the authority to be there. But the way that they try to rebrand history and whitewash with the events on January 6th, they're making us seem like you guys were the bad guy on that story because you guys stopped the mob. You guys stopped something bigger that we wanted to happen, and therefore we're going to call them hostages. It's insane. And coming from another country, and before I came here, I always used to hear these principles and values of the American system that no one is above the law. This is the line of opportunity along those things, and everybody's held accountable. Now, the country itself has not done that as promised always, but the majority of the time it does. And that's what I was suspecting on January 6th and after. And unfortunately, he has some elected officials who had sided with the violent mob instead of the officers who defended the Capitol. And it's very shameful, but then I realized that they don't have no shame whatsoever.
So in 1996, you made your first trip to the U.S. Capitol. Kind of quickly, what was that like? And what kind of impact did that have in your life?
Well, to be honest, that trip that came about very for selfish reasons. I was struggling a little bit in high school. Well, I'm minimizing a little bit. I was really struggling because I couldn't assimilate to the language. I was not doing great in my classes. The only classes that I was doing great or good enough were Spanish and volleyball. So those things. All the other classes that I had at that time, that were kind of like a waste of time to me, because every single time I tried to ask the teachers, "Hey, can you help me out? Can you spend a few more minutes with me?" Raise my hand, and they would chastise me or send me to detention because they thought I was being disruptive. And it wasn't because it got to a point that I bought plane tickets to go back to the Dominican Republic and stay there because I was having such a hard time getting the help that I needed and assimilating. And not only was I having trouble at school, but I also was having trouble at home with my parents, mainly my dad. There's a lot of things, a lot of layers that were happening around that time period in my life.
Yeah. All right. So let's get to the next level. You had lost the first love of your life. There was tension at home. You had graduated high school, but you were broke trying to pay for college. What happens next?
I persisted. I came back. I had after the trip to the Dominican Republic, I had a conversation with my grandfather before then, and he convinced me to give this country a second opportunity, a second try, and try harder. So when that happened, I came back and reorient myself. I was a little more disciplined in terms of asking for the help that I needed and then sticking with it. I eventually got through my guiding counselor, Ms. Vega, and she put me in the right path along with a few other supporting casts that I had. And that was great. It worked. But then a lot of things happened at home. My mom got burned. That kind of like set back a few things in my life. And it wasn't 9/11 again also happened around that time, which is something that I was already in the military doing 17-day orders just to help me pay with my education. And that kind of like 9/11 happened. It was a setback for me, but it was a bigger setback for the country. And when I was there in the Army base in Fort Todd in New York, and that day, that kind of like my education and everything else that I was going through, kind of like I saw it being put aside. It was irrelevant because I knew that at some point I was going to be called up to serve the country on active duty, and it wasn't going to be for 17 days like I was doing there. I completed those 17 days, and although I wanted to stay to continue to the assistant to the rescue at Ground Zero, my commander said, "We don't need you anymore. Now we have active duty, blah blah. You go back to being a citizen soldier a weekend, And to me, that was like, no, I could do a lot more. So I called the Coast Guard, trying to enlist in them as well, not realizing that I couldn't do both institutions at the same time, and they told me. So I kind of like broke my will. It stopped me for a little bit. But then I reading the newspapers, I noticed that there was a increase in demand for security guards. So I joined, took the class, the training, became a security guard and I worked in downtown Manhattan for almost 6 to 8 months, right 3 blocks, 2 blocks away from Ground Zero, and to the point that I was talking to some of those police officers and firefighters and all the people who were doing the work there. And that kind of like piqued my curiosity. And just like my trip to the Capitol back then, it also reinforced my thinking about maybe I should be a police officer, like that guy that I met at the Capitol. And that kind of like put in one, I kind of like at one point I was talking to this guy from Turkey, and he was like, well, if you're gonna be if you must, if we are putting ourselves in the line, might also just make it legit, to make it, become a full police officer. That way you have the power to do all the things that you saying you want to do. So he encouraged me. So this is not in the book, but that's exactly what happened. He told me, we just join the police, and because at that time, Chase Manhattan Bank, they had a police force, armed security guards, and they were in the talks of making them police officer, but then that never panned out. And I told them, well, I'm going to wait another month. If that doesn't pan out, then I'm out. And that's what I did. I began applying for several police departments throughout the eastern region, and I ended up at the Capitol years later.
Yeah, and one of the most compelling parts of the book, outside of, making that decision and to be with the Capitol Police. And I like the way that, you led everything up to that moment, and then boom, and then we go to January 6th. But the other thing that kind of hit me, brother, was your love life. I said, you went through some heartbreak. I don't want you to comment on that. I just wanted you to know that was reading that. I was like, because it was some parts of the book. I was like, is this the one that's going to make it all the way? Oh, no. You know what I'm saying? So y'all got to read the book about that. But let's go ahead and jump off because of time. And like I said, I want people to buy and read the book for themselves. Let's go on to January 6th. You were on the Capitol Police Force throughout the Trump administration. Was there any indication that your life was about to change forever?
I think probably after the second Million MAGA March or Women's March in December, that's when we kind of like we began to hear the former president say things like, we need to stop the steal, we're going to gather, see you there on January 6th, or blah, blah, blah. So at that point, we thought they would, it was going to be a normal day like all the other events that we ever had the past 17 years. And, um, it's unfortunate that not only was he broadcasting what he wanted to do, but a lot of people didn't, uh, you know, by action or inaction, we kind of like didn't pay too much attention or never imagined that not only the president of the United States was going to send the mob to the Capitol, but he would just watch everything happen and did not send the reinforcement that we needed during the day, because everything that happened on January 6th happened during broad daylight. And despite the fact that a lot of his advisors were telling him, hey, there's fighting, there's violence, there's people dying, and you should stop this, he chose to just watch and do nothing. A lot of also a lot of his supporters, people who were under his command, especially the Pentagon, they didn't want to do anything for optics, pretending that everything was going to be okay, despite seeing everything on TV, and they didn't want to irritate him or make it look political, when in fact it was a political thing that was happening, and he nearly destroyed our country, our constitution.
So how long was the actual battle with the insurrectionists? How many hours do you think that you were on that line fighting?
Well, I'll tell you this. I got to the Capitol on January 6th at around 6:10. I didn't go to my house. I didn't get back to my house until 4 a.m. the next day. The actual fighting with the police line, when they first breached, that was around 12:54, 12:50 during the day. And from that time, when I heard the radio call saying, send all you got, urgently on the radio, I got there like around 1:05, 1:04. And I didn't leave that area on the west front in the tunnel until around close to 6 p.m. So you're talking about almost 5 hours.
Yeah.
Fighting 4.5 hours, 5. And on and off fighting. I tried to defend the police line, hold the line against hundreds of people trying to breach it. We did the best we could. That's why I ran into some of the officers who now have become very fun, kind of like what we do in the Army, battle buddies, and now you have that relationship, that bond. But, we did what we could with what we had. What we didn't think, or what I thought was, never in my life would the President of the United States, 16 blocks away, watch an event happening at the Capitol, incited by himself, and then not send the help that we needed. Once we began losing the police line, I was like, you know what? I'm sure that he's watching. He'll send the cavalry, he'll send the reinforcement we need, and he did it. I saw Capitol Metropolitan Police mountain bike unit begin to descend from the stairs, and that was like 60, 70 people, and then they stopped. There was nobody else coming down, and I'm like, this is going to be a long day for us, and it was. We began losing a lot of ground rapidly. Officers being assaulted, injured, bleeding, with all kinds of weapons. I step on people's blood, my colleagues' blood, rioters' blood. They were not peaceful as some of the Republican side say they were. And the only reason why we began to escalate things was because they were not peaceful. They cherry picked some of these videos from that day just to suit their purpose and tell their narrative, but it wasn't peaceful. As a result, we lost all the ground on the west front. We continued to retreat up the inaugural stage, where we began to formulate a last stand, pretty much, inside the tunnel to try to defend the Capitol against hundreds of thousands of people trying to breach the Capitol on the west front. Normally, at the same entrance where the president comes out to be sworn in and take his oath of office. And on that particular area, that was where the most intense and fierce fighting happened. And I was in that area 4 hours, doing multiple things, fighting, pushing, shoving, defending that entrance, because I knew as one of the supervisors of the Capitol Police and someone who had worked there for a long time, I knew some of the areas around us are very sensitive, and some of those areas are where some of the members are usually goes for refuge and hideouts. So I knew what was at stake. I knew the vice president was in the back, inside the Capitol. Nobody else, no one came through there that we did not allow. I think it was like 2 people that we allowed to go in, and that was because for medical reasons. But we held the line. We stopped the mob from going in there. It's unfortunate that a lot of people see those rioters being peaceful, because they're not, but they know that that's not true. I'm sure if they had the same events with the same totality of circumstances happening in their house or their place of work, I'm sure that they would want us, the police officers, to do what we did on that day and prevent harm to themselves and to their family. So that's unfortunate.
So, not to sound like an NFL injury report, but just kind of list the injuries that you suffered personally once you finally got some medical attention.
Well, I didn't realize that I was as injured as bad as I was because I had the adrenaline going on. I had the responsibility of protecting and continuing to defend the Capitol. And so I didn't get the full picture until later that night and months later when I actually got treated. So the most severe ones that I received were I had a foot bone fusion surgery a month later. That was to fix the first 2 digits of my right toe, on my right foot. I'm sorry, and so that took. I currently have 8 screws and 1 metal plate in the right foot. On my left shoulder, I had a rotator cuff dislocation, labrum tear, and bicep tear on that day. Both my hands were bleeding with contusions, lacerations, bruises. I still have the scars for it. And those are the most severe ones. But then you have the PTSD aggravation, because when I came back from Iraq, I came back with PTSD. Not only did I have PTSD on January 6th, but then now it got aggravated with another trauma, different type of trauma. And then you have what I now say a lot, it's the moral injury, because I know I did the right thing. I know I did what I was supposed to do, and then you have the same people who had risked my life telling me that it wasn't necessary. I shouldn't have done that. And if it didn't happen, and if it did happen, it wasn't as bad as I say it did happen. But, On January 6th, they were not saying those things. They were running for their lives. On January 7th, they weren't saying that because they were fearful of that guy who sent them out to kill them, you know. So over the days in the aftermath, they have evolved their sentiment. They had forgotten how fearful they were of that mob that day. And if it wasn't because the actions that I did and my colleagues, they would have died. I think early this month from January 6th, I reposted something on Twitter, on X now, and it's a 4 collages that someone sent me, one online sleuth sent me. It's about all the myself is a collage, 4 different collages, pinpointing me at some of the actions or things that I did. And if you look at the videos of the West Front, you're going to find me. You'll be able to identify me left and right. Oh, there's me, there's me, there's me, there's me. Because of things that I was trying to do, trying to protect all these people, regardless who political affiliation they were or they're from. I even tried to help some of them member of the mob who were attacking me because they were injured. So I didn't see that. I didn't think I was doing anything political. I didn't think I was doing anything other than my job. Like I told you earlier, I see and I saw the humanity in some of these people, even though they were the one attacking me and my colleagues. So again, I didn't do any of those things for awards, accolade, or certificate. I did it because it was my job, and I tried to do my job to the best I could, without prejudice. If someone sees it differently, then that's on them, because I actually was doing my job and doing what I was supposed to.
All right, so we're up against it as far as time, and you have a story. We could probably do like 2 or 3 podcast episodes just strictly on your story. But for the listeners out there, you can get the book so you can understand the emotional toll that it took on Sergeant Gonell and the rest of the guys that were there, ladies that were there. And even his motivation to decide, you know what, I'm going to write a book about this. I'm going to tell the story. What do you want the people who read the book, read American Shield, what do you want them to take away from the book?
Well, one thing that people need to realize is, had it not been because of January 6th, nobody would have known any of the sacrifices that I had done for this country, or the adversities that I have overcome, the challenges, obstacles, both personal and also career-wise. Every single time that something happened to me, I always try to approach it in a different angle, in a way that, it might be the longest way, but that's what I knew that I had to do if I wanted to persevere. I wanted to become somebody. And to a point, I did reach the middle class. I did reach the American dream, and all that was, in a way, taken and robbed away from me because of my actions on January 6th. Again, you have people who continue to deny what happened to me, to my colleagues, to the Capitol, to themselves, because they were the target of it, believe it or not. And I think if I was saying that Antifa or Black Lives Matters or the Muslim or the Latino did those things, so they were the one attacking the Capitol, then I would be praised by the far right, by the Republican side. But I'm not. I'm just telling them what I had, what I witnessed, what I experienced, and it doesn't matter to me who did it, because I'm sure if Joe Biden decides to do the same thing next year, I'm sure that they will have a fed up, and they will want somebody to, like what I did, to defend the Capitol, regardless who is in power, who's in office. And I just want people to realize also that this should not have happened. And if it happened again, that's going to be on us for not paying attention to what the former president is saying, because not only did he orchestrated some of these things or didn't do anything to stop it, but he's out there encouraging and downplaying what happened, and also insinuating that it might happen again, 2.0. Hopefully, if that's happened, there are enough Officer Gonell standing on their way to stop him, or the other officers who there. I no longer am a police officer because of the injuries, both mental and physical and moral, that I sustained. And I want people to know that it has not been easy for me. I continue to be engaged in some of these cases in court. Even though I'm not a police officer anymore, because what happened is very important to me to hold these people accountable for what they did to me. They ended my career, and I was assaulted by more than 40 people, one way or another, and only half of them have been gone through the court system. So I do want you guys to know is the book is not just about January 6th, it's about my entire life and sacrifices that I had done, not only to protect myself, my family, my country, but also a life of service, a life of sacrifice, both as a police officer and as a military member. I appreciate your time and thank you for having me in your show. I hope you guys enjoy. The book is available, American Shield, The Sergeant Immigrant That Defended Democracy, is available both in Spanish and English. In Spanish is called Escudo Americano, El Sargento que Defendió la Democracia. And also, please review it. Please review it if you can, if you get a chance, and tell your friends. It will help me a lot in terms of spreading the word and all the people knowing about the sacrifices that officers like myself did on January 6th, and not because we were, for one party or another, because we kept our oath when we did what we were supposed to. And I appreciate your time, brother.
Well, Sarge, I appreciate your time. Again, y'all, the name of the book is American Shield. Do you have like a website where if people wanted to reach out to you personally that they can go to?
I have on Twitter. You can find me on Sergeant AQGO. That's the best route that you could find me. And I don't have a website available, but through Twitter, X now, Sergeant AQGO, you can find me there.
All right, guys. Sergeant Aquilino Gonell. Again, sir, thank you for your service and thank you for your time for coming on the podcast.
Cool.
All right, guys, and we'll catch y'all on the other side. All right, and we are back. And again, what an honor and a privilege to have that brother on. And when I tell you, Sarge is the real one, he's the real one. Yeah, so I think you're going to see a lot more of him in the days, months, years to come, as we continue on our journey to try to save democracy. But speaking about saving democracy, my next guest has been doing his part to create future leaders of democracy, and somebody that, I met being a candidate for office in Mississippi, and really valued his input, and sometimes we got into disagreements, but for the most part, he was very, very helpful in my journey, and I'm really honored to have him on. And his name is Dr. Marvin King. Dr. Marvin King is Associate Professor of Political Science with a joint appointment in African American Studies at the University of Mississippi. He He teaches classes on African American politics, politics of the American South, political inequality, and American federalism. In 2022, Dr. King received a grant to host a conference on inclusive economies. As a result of that award, he had many interactions with local nonprofits, economic development officials, and state legislators about developing inclusive economies, which is an economic system intentionally designed to think about workers left behind in the current system. In 2023, Dr. King co-chaired a multi-institutional collaboration producing an inclusive economies roadshow across the state of Mississippi. He previously served on the Oxford, Mississippi Planning Commission, where he learned firsthand how local land development codes can impede equitable economic growth. Dr. King served on the Oxford's Park Commission, which oversees youth sports. He also has experience as an expert witness in federal redistricting trials. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to have as a guest on this podcast, Dr. Marvin King. All right, Dr. Marvin King. How you doing, brother? You doing good?
I'm doing well. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. It's good to talk to you again. It's been a long time. And you've been up there at Ole Miss for a while. You've been there since 2005.
I don't want to think about how many years I've been here now. It has been a while. That's true.
Yeah, because it's like when we first met, you were really just kind of coming onto the campus, and I was
right
out there trying to do my thing for the U.S. Senate and all that stuff. So
that's right. That was. I know those years from like 2006 to 2014. I was more active during that period, and so I was, I had my ear to the ground.
Yeah, I understand. Those were some cool times. I ain't gonna lie compared to what we're dealing with now. But
yes, that is true.
What I normally do with a guest is that I try to find a quote that either something they said, something they wrote, or something that relates to the topic of the conversation.
Okay.
So your quote is going to be, "The method of political science is the interpretation of life. Its instrument is insight, a nice understanding of subtle, unformulated conditions." What does that quote mean to you?
Trying to understand how decisions are made in the political realm. And when I think of political science, I'm thinking of power. We're studying power. Who gets it? Why do they get it? How do they have it? How do they keep it? What can be done if they're not using their power correctly? And but a lot of this goes back to insights as far as you, the individual, what you think is, an appropriate use of power. And what power should we give to those who rule us?
Yeah. Define the difference between political science and politics. Now, for the audience, here's the disclaimer. Dr. King and I are pretty cool. Like I said, we haven't talked in a while, but I got him mad one time because I joked around and said that political science was an oxymoron. And I was speaking as a politician. And Dr. King got on and he said, "No, you can't say that. Why would you say that?" But so define for the audience the difference between political science and politics.
So great memory, great question. I would say that political science, we're studying who gets what, when, where, how. Politics is the practical application of the use of that power and achieving power. And they're very different. So political science, we're just sitting here in our office and we just kind of read about what the politicians do and try to come up with some theory to explain it. But politics itself, in its raw, undiluted form, it's hard. It's rough. And it's about power. And we see this. I'm sure everyone in your audience can think of examples, not only nationally, but at the state and local levels where they live, of how people try to achieve power and how they wield that power. And that to me is politics. And what I see with my students is a lot of them want to dip their toes in politics, but then most aren't cut out for it. It's an alpha world out there. And a lot of folks, they read the books and they're like, oh, this is interesting and exciting, I want to get involved. And then they do. And then usually after 2 or 3 years, they're like, nah, I'm going to go get a job at the car dealership. I'm going to get a job at the bank. I don't want any part of this. And I'm like, good for you.
Yeah. I used to, when people would, even my father. So my father was like totally amazed that I got into politics.
Mm-hmm.
Because he said, Eric, you really got this incredible BS meter and you really don't tolerate people a lot. And so he was just so stunned that I was, not only interested, but I actually got elected to something. I actually was pretty good at it. So, I definitely can relate to what you're saying about how tough it is to be out there and to do stuff. But to be honest, and this is part of my maturity talking to, what you all do, not only as teachers, but also as people that actually try to get information, try to figure out what is going on. I think it's tougher now than it ever has been to be a political scientist. Do you feel that way? Do you feel that it's harder now to get an accurate political analysis than it's ever been before?
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I would say that it is harder because it's changing. You can't assume that the lessons that you taught your students 10 or 15 years ago are going to apply today. And our understanding of what I thought were basic concepts and core values that all Americans shared, for instance, on like democracy, I accepted those as a given. And it's hard because I'm having to reconcile what I've always been taught and what I've learned growing up in and outside the classroom to what I'm seeing now. And so that is hard. And so I have to adjust myself personally, but then how do I teach this to the students in a way that they learn and take something from it? And, I've evolved as a professor, especially in the classroom. Now my goal is, it's fairly straightforward and simple, but I want my students, when they graduate, or at least leave my classes, to be able to have an honest conversation with someone where they are confident and competent to talk about the facts. And that seems like a low bar, but given where America is now, that to me is what I can do. If I can produce groups of students who can go out in the world and say, no, I understand how government works and what it's trying to do and what some of these politicians are trying to achieve. If they have a understanding of that, then I feel like I've succeeded. But that's because I've had to go back and reassess, what do I want out of my students? I can't just assume that everybody, for instance, supports democracy. And I probably took that for granted and didn't emphasize some of those core values when I first started teaching. So that's difficult, but I feel like I've been able to recognize and keep up with how the world is changing, for better or worse.
So I remember when I was asked to teach a class at Jackson State, the political science director said, Fleming, teach strictly from the book. Don't you go off on these tangents about the, the inner workings and your war stories about the legislative process. Just teach strictly for the book. You've got a little more tenure and some status, so I know you can kind of deviate from the book a little bit.
I go off the book.
Yeah.
I go off script.
Do you learn something? You were talking about the challenges and not assuming. Do you learn something from your students at this stage in teaching? Are you picking in the atmosphere? Are you learning something from your students about how to teach this?
Well, what I learned from my students is they bring me information from their experiences. Here at the University of Mississippi, about half of our students are from Mississippi, about half are from out of state. But most of those out of state students are still within, say, the South, right? From Texas to Georgia up to Virginia. That's most of our students, about half from Mississippi. So it's really useful for me because I'm constantly asking them, what are things like for you back home? And so in that way, I'm learning about what's happening in Georgia and Texas and Arkansas and Tennessee and all over. And then that enables me to kind of hear these different experiences and then parlay that into a message. And I can take their experiences with my academic research and knowledge and tell, I feel like, a coherent story about here's how we are now and here's how we got there. And I always try to do that in all my classes, whatever the subject is. I always start with, well, let's go back in time and work our way forward. So I'm a political scientist, but often my classes might have a political history feel to it. We'll work our way up. And so I just have that accumulated knowledge, which I'm then able to articulate to the next round of students. But I'm always pulling from them, what is happening out there because, I'm not in Missouri. I'm not in all these other places that my students are coming from. So I do learn from them. And I just taught a new class for the first time called Political Inequality. And essentially it's about income and wealth inequality and how that affects our politics and how politics affects the income and wealth that we all have. And so there I learned a lot from my students because they all have different socioeconomic backgrounds. Some are more well off than others. And so I learn a lot. And that's what I like about teaching is it's not static. Every semester is different, even if I'm teaching the same classes.
So since you brought that up, let me get to that question I wanted to ask you about that. For the last couple of years, you've really dedicated a great deal of work connecting economics and public policy. Talk about why have you kind of put this emphasis on making that connection?
Okay, sure. So if you'll bear with me, I'll tell you a story about a former student of mine. I'll leave his name out of it, but he's one of my favorite all-time students. Super bright kid, came from North Mississippi, and then he graduated and he did TFA for a couple of years, Teach for America, out in the Delta, and then he went up to D.C., worked on Capitol Hill, and then he went to Harvard for his master's degree. And his thesis was on the racial education gap in Mississippi schools, the achievement gap on all the tests, right? Black kids are scoring lower than white kids. And so we spent a lot of time talking about why that's the case. And I emphasized to him, I said, a lot of this has to go back to segregation and housing. And I was explaining how schools funding is based off of property taxes. And you've got differential levels of white wealth and black wealth, and this manifests itself in our homes and in the housing values. But then the schools will have more or less resources just depending on where you live. I said, this is the black school child's, it's not they're just born into it, but they're born into a structure that is going to provide less for their schools. And that's the state. So I kind of percolated on this. And then so years later, I say, you know what, I kind of want to move in this direction because to me, this is like the core of understanding not only income inequality, but then political inequality, because as we know, people with less income are less likely to vote. They're less likely to engage in the political process. Well, if we want to change the things that I think a lot of us want to change, and probably a lot of your listeners want to change, you need people to be engaged. But it kind of comes down to economics, right? This interconnectedness of economics and politics. So going back to that student, years later, he says, you know what, Dr. King, I'm going to go get my MBA. I said, your MBA? Why are you going to get your MBA? He said, well, do you remember a long time ago you told me? I didn't remember telling him this, but he said I told him this. He said, well, if you really want to change the world, this is what I said to him. He said, if you really want to change the world, it would really help if you were rich. And then, because I said, then you can be a philanthropist. You can lobby all the politicians. You'll have access to all the politicians. You can run for office. The world is your oyster when you have a lot of money. So he calls me and he says, after all these years, I've learned all this. I have a lot of experience, and now I want to go make some money. Because he said, I want to change the world. I said, go do it. And, but we don't all have those opportunities. I mean, some of us do. He's an incredible student, incredible young man, and he's got a great future, and I'm happy to watch him on his journey. But in a nutshell, he's right. I think I was right that it does make a difference. And so figuring out how to create more opportunities for more people has kind of become my mission. But as a professor, I have kind of some limits on what I can do, but what I can do and what I can control is teach students about the structure of the system that's out there that has affected people's opportunities, economic and political, over the last, all of American history.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you're focusing in on that. One of the things that, one of my mantras when I was active in, running and serving in politics was the fact that our obligation as Black politicians is to create and improve Black wealth. And my role model was always Maynard Jackson. And
Okay.
Ironically, now I'm here in Atlanta, but it's like that was who I looked at. It's like, his whole objective was to build a Black middle class in Atlanta. And
right.
The proof is in the pudding. His
That's
legacy is we have a strong Black middle class in Atlanta. Not
That's
as strong as it should be now, but that's a whole nother conversation for another show.
That's right.
But, I always thought, and I think about another great guy that people don't talk about a lot was Michael White in Cleveland.
Okay.
How he transformed, we watch on TV, the Guardians play and the Browns play and all these, the Cavaliers, but it was Michael White's vision to make that happen. And because everybody was playing pretty much in the same stadium, right? And he used that to build a rebirth in Cleveland. So, and
I was just reading about Cleveland's downtown, how that place has really transformed itself the last handful of years.
Yeah, and Michael White was the catalyst for it, and Black folks benefited from that. So, I'm really glad that you're focusing in on that, and because of where you teach, you have a broader audience. And say, where I went to school at Jackson State or something like that, even though universities are more diverse than most institutions in America, you have a more diverse group to work with. And so that helps that more people are getting that message and delving into that subject.
That's right. And what I like about it here, I actually appreciate the fact that a lot of our students are out of state, because I know that what I'm teaching hopefully will reach beyond the state. I mean, it's important here in Mississippi, of course, but even beyond, and I ask students all the time, and you can see, how professors talk about that aha light bulb moment, or, for me, it's the jaw drop. when I tell them, I say, hey, look, how many of you just go back home? I'll talk about something simple, but it's important, like zoning. I say, go back home, and the next time you're home, look at where the nice homes are. Look at where the public housing is. Look at where the low income housing is, and just start thinking about some of those physical barriers like highways and freeways that bisect towns. Like just kind of just think about it and just ask yourself, did that just happen by chance? Because one thing I always tell them is that nothing happens by chance, right? Those highways were built where they were built for a reason. The industrial parts of town, I talk about like the factories and stuff. I said, go back to your town, find the nicest neighborhood, and see how close the closest factory is. It's nowhere near it. It's going to be way on the other side of town. So that never happens by accident. And so those sorts of moments, they're like, oh, really? It's like, yeah, that doesn't happen by accident. There was an old, I try not to make it always so serious, because sometimes it's heavy. And I recognize, I'm talking with 19, 20-year-olds, and truly, they did not create any of these policies. They're born into it, black or white or whatever, rich or poor, they're born into it. So I recognize that it's not their doing. It's not. But that doesn't mean that they can't do anything about it. And so I'll play this little clip from Dave Chappelle. And he talks about going into I probably shouldn't do this, but he talks about going into the ghetto and he sees liquor store, pawn shop, gun shop.
Right.
And I ask him, I said, now you go to the nice part of town. Do you see all that stuff? Well, no, that's always on another side of town. I'm like, there you go. Let's think about that, how that comes to be. And I feel the students learn a lot, and then they go back home and maybe they see their home a little differently. In my Southern politics class, I always talk about, every town's got a First Baptist church, and usually it's white. And then there's a Second Baptist church, and usually it's black. And I'm like, well, why is this? The same Baptist God. But it then allows me to talk about segregation, discrimination, Jim Crow, even the churches were segregated. What does that say? So it gets them to see their world differently. And I feel I'm not pointing anything out that you and all your listeners wouldn't already know. I'm just showing that to them in the context of African American politics.
Yeah. And it's a beautiful thing. All right, so time we have left, let's try to delve into 2024 as much as we can.
Sure.
I heard a political pundit say recently that 12% of the country will vote to save democracy in the 2024 election. Another 12% will vote to advance an authoritarian state. And everyone else will be voting based on the issue that impacts them the most. How accurate of an assessment is that?
That might be on. I hadn't thought about it in terms of percentages, but given the GOP base that is dead set on voting for Trump, I think that's that element is there, and they're not going away, and their desire to see democracy uplifted is not there. Trump has, many times alluded to his authoritarian tendencies, and we see the people he admires are not lowercase Democrats. And you've got the never Trumpers, right? Who, the Democrats, I guess, who would be considered never Trumpers. I'd say it's probably more than 12%, but the issue is it's not a winning coalition. Those that believe in democracy, they're not enough where you could guarantee victory. there's enough independents who care about democracy, but then they're self-interested voters, and that's not a pejorative. That's just in political science how we would describe pocketbook voters. People are thinking about their jobs and their wages and housing costs and inflation. They're just self-interested voters. They're voting on who they think can make their problems go away. And the irony is, some of these voters also voted for Obama, right? So you don't want to, that's just who they are. But I would say it's a distressingly high number of people who will vote for who will not vote to support democracy.
Yeah, that's kind of the scary thing about it. But you're a student of history. I am too, and that element has always been in America, and it's just something that my argument has always been just have them on the fringe. Don't actually elect these people to office. You know what I'm saying?
That's right. That's what's changed.
Yeah.
Well, you're right about that. In my Southern politics class, I spend a lot of time talking about America's the whole history of black politics is overcoming the South in particular's anti-democratic impulses. And that's all Jim Crow was anti-democracy. And so you're right, we've had this strain in American political culture since day one. The difference is we never had a presidential candidate who so clearly articulated these kind of anti-democratic beliefs.
Yeah. All right. So final question. What issues do you believe is going to motivate black people to go to the polls this election, nationally? I mean, I know you have a focus in Mississippi, but, just
Sure.
from your reading and whatever research you may have done, what do you think are the main issues that are going to get black people to come out to vote? Because I don't think the democracy thing is going to work.
No, that's a great question. That's the $1 million question every election term is, how do we get black people to vote in appropriate numbers? That's always the issue. What will motivate people to come out? And I don't think saving democracy, unfortunately, is enough to do it. It has to be issues speaking to their collective good. In recent past years, I might say, police reform, something like that might get people out, but it's hard to nationalize that issue. That's not really an issue Biden can campaign on. That's more of a state and local issue, even though it has national resonance. I'm not sure. We're seeing this with a lot of white voters with abortion. You're seeing a lot of white voters come out and vote to save choice for women. I'm not sure for black voters I would say that's not going to be a big motivating factor for most black voters. So it's probably the economy and jobs and inflation, but it has to be articulated in a way that's personal to them. Biden, I feel, has to talk about, hey, look, yes, inflation was high, and he has to acknowledge that that's been painful for a lot of people, but then talk about it is coming down. We're on a path where it is coming down, and he has to figure out a way to make that meaningful to each black voter. But that's hard. That's hard. I mean, how hard that is to get messaging across in a way that's meaningful to people. If I were Biden, I'd figure out a way to hire Stacey Abrams and get her thoughts on it, because and the folks who ran Raphael Warnock's campaign and folks like that to think about it. I study this and I don't know the answer. And if anyone says, "Oh, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to do," it's a little statistics mixed in with some voodoo witchcraft, but nobody knows the answer.
Well, having watched it firsthand here, my suggestion would be, if you're a candidate running nationally or statewide, you need to hire Raphael Warnock's media team. The commercials that he ran were some of the best commercials I had ever seen. They were funny on some point, very
he's
serious.
Walking
and
his dog. Those are great.
Yeah, I mean, those were some of the best commercials. I mean, it was just, even playing on the fact about Herschel Walker being this great athlete. I mean, that was, he came right out the gate with that one. So, but that I agree with you. Messaging is the most important thing. And that, I just had a show where I had 3 different Democratic political commentators. And, that was basically the theme. It's all about messaging. And hopefully, for Biden's sake, really for the country's, in my opinion, but for Biden's sake, that he figures that out. But, I don't know. So look, man, how can people get in touch with you? And if they want to pick your brain like I did today, how do they get in touch with you?
Sure. The best thing is email. It's real simple. My first name, Marvin, Marvin, at olemiss.edu. olemiss.edu. That's the best.
All right. So, Dr. Marvin King, I appreciate you coming on, brother. Keep up the good work. Hopefully, next time I get to Mississippi, I can make it up north. Usually, when I get there, I'm stuck in Jackson, but hopefully we'll run into each other soon, man. Appreciate you.
I appreciate it, and thanks for the time. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too. Thank you. All right, guys, and we'll catch y'all on the other side. All right, and we are back. And so now my final guest is a sister who has devoted her life to make sure that good causes gets the funding that they need. And when I say good causes, I mean causes that will have a positive impact on this kind of underlying theme of the show about saving democracy. And her name is Alexis Buchanan Thomas. Hailing from small town Findlay, Ohio, Alexis was born into a family ingrained in the fight for racial justice. Her parents started the first chapter at NAACP in Findlay, and her mother became the first Black member of the school board in the 80s. Inspired by her parents' activism, Alexis started a Black student union while attending high school. Upon graduation, Alexis attended Clark Atlanta University, where she obtained a degree in mass communications. After working in corporate America for 11 years for companies like AT&T and Global Experience Specialists, or GES, where she gained experience in business, account management, sales, and planning large-scale events, Alexis decided to lend her talents to philanthropy, beginning a career in funds development. Since getting involved in the nonprofit community 15 years ago, she has raised over $100 million in funds for various nonprofits through donors, grants, corporate sponsorships, and fundraising events. $100 million. All right. Alexis has worked with a variety of nonprofit and corporate clients, including the Center Helping Obesity in Children End Successfully, or CHOICES, the Devereaux, Georgia Treatment Network, Atlanta Celebrates Photography, and Hope Atlanta, and is currently the Director of Development for Black Votes Matter. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to have as a guest on this podcast, Alexis Buchanan Thomas. All right, Alexis Buchanan Thomas. How you doing, sister? You doing good?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me today.
Well, it's good to have you on. You're one of those people that everybody needs, right? In the background, doing the work. Now you kind of get out there on the front a little bit, but for the most part, you out there, and we're going to delve into the work that you do. But I just wanted to say that from the opening because having been an elected official, having been a candidate for statewide office and all that, you learn to appreciate the people that do the work so you don't have to. And you can be the face of whatever and be able to articulate what needs to be done. So I just wanted to throw that flower at you real quick.
Yeah.
So how I start off my interviews is that I try to find a quote that either that person may have said or written in a book or something that relates to the work that they do. So your quote is, "Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love." What does that quote mean to you?
I love that you pulled that, quote from Dr. King. We actually use it very often with our work with Black Voters Matter Fund. To me, it means power is love, right? And if you love folks, you want to empower them, right? And I feel like that's what every one of us wants to do is feel empowered. And the work that I do is really teaching people how to empower themselves through their voting. So, yeah.
What is the Black Votes Matter Fund, and what is your role with the organization?
Sure. So Black Voters Matter is actually, so we actually have two organizations. We have a C3 and a C4. And so for those of y'all who aren't totally familiar with what that means in the political space, a C3 nonprofit, you have to kind of stay very strictly in nonpartisan lines, where a C4 allows you to get a little bit more into lobbying. And we have both entities so we can be flexible. But ironically, again, relative to your quote, we are first and foremost, we call ourselves a power building organization. And so we build power in Black communities through the power of voting. And that's through a variety of different ways. We are a capacity building organization, so we support grassroots orgs that are actually on the ground doing the work by building their capacity, whether it's giving them communications tools, helping them with marketing campaigns. We re-grant half to a third of every dollar that we receive to these grassroots orgs. My founders, Cliff Albright and Latasha Brown, definitely really feel like the South and these grassroots orgs are underinvested in. And so that was, part of their mission was to provide resources to these groups that are actually doing the actual work on the ground to support them. And so, yeah, it's a little bit of everything. It's, voter education. It's, of course, we are heavily involved in advocating for, voting rights, whether it's on the state and local level with policy changes. We've been doing a lot of that work when a lot of the backlash came out in 2021 with these voter suppression laws on the books. And I call it backlash because really I feel like that's what it was, right? They saw a big, turnout and decided to put these laws in the books to restrict folks' access to the ballot. But we, do a lot of policy work in that sense. And then I loved how you were just speaking about, whether it's homeless or whatever, it's all intersectional, right? And so a lot of the work that we do in these communities, because we say voters matter 365 days a year, right? We can't parachute into communities, in September before a November election and expect that they're going to want to engage with us. And honestly, most of our communities, that's what they feel, right? That's why we say Black voters matter, not Black votes, right? Because a lot of politicians come in and just want the Black vote, but the voters don't matter. And so we have programs that also wrap around these issues that are plaguing our communities. And, we do our best to really educate folks about how it's all intersectional with voting, from everything to healthcare and Medicaid expansion. Of course, this issue with abortion as healthcare is on the ballot. We have a warrant clinic where, it's really part of our criminal justice profile. And we go into communities and wipe out misdemeanor warrants and fines. And that's been a way to really incorporate this conversation with Black men and engage them about why voting is so important. So it's all these different things. Even climate, we have a really big climate justice portfolio, and that's because of what we were hearing on the ground in Black communities. A lot of people don't, necessarily recognize that, but most of these natural disasters are, people of color is proportionally affected by these things. And so, and some of the stuff has been going on forever, right? We're doing work in the Black Belt in Alabama on coal ash. Same thing is happening in North Carolina. We started this work in Albany, Georgia about high utility bills, and that ended up in a voter education campaign about what your public service commissioner is and how that's an elected official who helps decide your utility rates, right? So I would say just overall, Black Voters Matter's mission is to empower Black communities through the power of voting by touching in all these different ways and really just educating folks on how it's all intersectional. To your point, politics is local. And if you can start there on the grassroots level, you can make change, as well as, why the South is so important for political change. We are based in the South. We're in 9 core states. But we have about, I think now we're at 14 additional states that we're doing work in. But we have started in the South because we recognize that's where political power rests in, right? You look at most of the folks in politics who make big decisions, they come from Southern states. And we think, honestly, too, there's really opportunities for us as Black communities to regain political power in the South. We know there's been a huge reverse migration, and so just organizing that political power is impactful. So yeah, Black Voters Matter. So 365. I matter, you matter, we matter. I'm quoting the sayings now.
I got you. So, and your role is?
I'm a director of development. So I've been with the organization. I just hit my 4-year anniversary. It's been really a pleasure to see the organization grow. I mean, we are a startup organization. I feel like we're getting out of startup, status, but the organization was founded in 2016, again, by Cliff Albright and Latasha Brown. They were in Selma, Alabama, doing work for the Doug Jones versus Roy Moore election, which I'm, sure you're familiar with. And Doug Jones was pushed into the Senate by behind the power of Black women, and Black Voters Matter was founded from there. And so, yeah, I raised the funds to help support all these programs. Yes.
So that leads me to my next question. How much of a challenge has it been to raise the funds necessary to do what the organization needs to do?
It's been a challenge, right? We were, of course, one of the Black-led organizations that was, definitely benefited from, the windfall of 2020, and folks, of course, the unfortunate thing with George Floyd and then the election and people wanting to contribute to Black-led organizations. That being said, that's gone down considerably in the last couple of years, and it's not just us that have experienced it. We're talking to other orgs who are similar to us. Everyone's seeing it on the ground. It's been, tougher to fundraise. It's always, fundraising is always tough, right? I love it. I've been doing this work for 15 years now, and so it's something that I actually do enjoy. But and part of what comes with fundraising is that things ebb and flow, and that you'll have a George Floyd moment, and then the next year it's Ukraine, right? Now it's Israel and Hamas, and people's attention shifts, and they want to invest in that. But there's been some of this backlash for DEI initiatives and just African American history that's also trickled down into supporting Black-led orgs. And so we are, seeing some struggles with fundraising on that side. And honestly, I wish that more of our community would invest in our work. That's honestly been a struggle. And it's not that we don't invest, but we can invest more. And so I would love to see more diversification of just, support by Black folks and Black-led organizations.
Yeah, because you touched on a number of things in those 2 answers. You talked about, and I'll get to the Katrina impact with the climate justice deal. But I remember when I was working with the ACLU in Mississippi when Donald Trump got elected. And the ACLU just got hit with all sorts of money. They really kind of spazzed out. You would think an organization that had been around for a long time had some kind of protocol to deal with the influx of money. And they were like, what do we do? They were scrambling, It's like, well, don't spend it all, but everybody benefited from that. Then of course, that waned down a little bit. And we had, I'm sure they had a little uptick after, like you said, the murder of George Floyd, but so I'm glad you addressed that specifically, because that's something that I feared was going to happen. That once the corporations realize, it's like, okay, well, now we got these customers, these black customers. Now they know we're not racist, supposedly. So we're going to ease off of this DEI thing a little bit. You know what I'm saying? We're going to cut these folks. And I knew that was going to happen because that's our history. So, you've been in the corporate world and now you're in the nonprofit sector. I just wanted to kind of tap your brain to see how that was impacting you. And I think you addressed that.
It's been interesting though. Yeah, it's been interesting though. I will say this, we actually at Black Voters Matter have a decent corporate portfolio of support, right? And we've had some corporations reach out to us because they're struggling with how to support us, because there has been such a backlash on DEI. You look at what happened with Budweiser, you look at what happened with Target, and just even how they're targeting some of these companies that have DEI officers, right? And so we have had some corporations reach out to us and say, we want to continue to support y'all, but we're trying to figure out how we can navigate, these waters. So I don't think it's necessarily, all of their fault, because they also too have a customer base that they have to appeal to as well. But then I will say on the other side, we do have some corporations that gave to us in 2020 during the height of George Floyd, haven't heard from them since. And I've reached back to them every year, right? As me as a fundraiser, that's what I'm supposed to do is, hey, you gave us a gift. Can you come back and give us another? And I would say, 60% of the folks who gave in 2020 have not returned. So yeah, it is something to talk about. But I think that we as consumers have to start holding these corporations more accountable where, okay, yeah, you gave this donation in 2020, but what have you continued to do to support these initiatives?
Yeah. And then the other issue that I wanted to highlight out of that answer was, what I explained about endowments for HBCUs, right? So, and the comparison I always make because, the university makeup is similar. So I went to Jackson State, and so our endowment, last I was checked, was like under $40 million or some real small number. So Rice University in Houston actually has less students than Jackson State, but their endowment is close to $1 billion. And they say, well, why is that? And I said, well, let's look at the history. Rice University was started by, first of all, it's a private school. It was started by a gift from Mr. Rice when he died. And the whole purpose of that school was to create engineers, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like from its inception, they've been putting out engineers, whereas Jackson State started off initially as a seminary. Then for the majority of its history, it was a teacher's college, right? Well, a good bit of its beginning, It was a teacher's college. And that education, and we just got an engineering school in my lifetime, right? So it's like when you have graduates that are graduating and they're getting engineering degrees and they're getting these jobs that are in the engineering field, they can give more money than folks that are getting teachers' jobs and trying to give money and support their institution. It's night and day. So, I think, and that's the issue dealing with, for every $100 that a white man has, a black man has 5. It's going to be hard to get the money we need to do the work that we need to do from our own community because of that disparity. And of course, that's why y'all doing the work, so y'all can get the politicians in to fix that wealth gap. But I mean, that's just a reality we have to face.
It's true to some degree, but I think that we could also invest more in our communities. I know I'm going to light some fires by saying this,
Go on,
but
light
I
them.
feel like I feel like this is my personal opinion. We invest a lot in churches in the Black community, right? I was raised AME, grew up in AME church, still make a donation. But that being said, there's orgs that are doing the work in the community that can actually use more investment, right? We could spread that investment, right? And I just feel like we don't do that as a Black community, right? We can invest more in some of these grassroots orgs that are doing. I don't know if you're on nextdoor.com, but I'm on Nextdoor, and I hate to get on that website. It's like the social networking website for neighbors because it's constant feed of people asking for help, right? Like, I'm having this problem, I'm having that problem. And okay, churches aren't really built up or don't have the infrastructure to help folks in the way that some of these grassroots orgs can, but there's not the same investment. So I agree to some degree, but I also feel like we should invest more in these orgs, that are actually doing the work. Because again, but I think also part of it is education, right? Because people don't necessarily see how they're intersectional, and we do have to do a better job of educating our community to understand why all these things are intersectional, right? So if you invest in a grassroots org that is lobbying against, or if you go vote and you vote in every election and you choose a judge, you vote for a judge that is open to criminal justice reform, that may affect you, right, in your day-to-day life if you get a ticket versus investing that money in the church that's not necessarily advocating in that way. So just my opinion.
Yeah, and there's a historical bias because of that too, because for a long time the church was the political organization.
We used to work more closely together, and I agree.
Yeah. I mean, that was our safe space. So
yeah,
that's the historical connection. And like you said, we have to evolve from that now that we know that, we have the capacity to do the work outside of the church infrastructure. We have that freedom to do it now. But old habits are hard to break. But I know, I can tell your tenacity, you're going to figure that out.
That has been honestly a goal of mine for a long time, because I've worked for, a few different Black-led organizations, and of course, numerous white-led organizations. And I just find across the board, our donor bases are at predominantly white, right? Like, we don't necessarily contribute. Even, the HBCU conversation, I'm a Clark Atlanta graduate. But even I did a interview on a community radio some years ago talking about why people don't give back to HBCUs because of the customer service aspect, because you have, so many problems. And when you're done, right? And then also too, we're not taught that when we enroll, right? Like, when you go to a white institution, you're taught from the time you get on campus, when you become an alumni, you have to give back. And that culture's not ingrained in us. So that's part of it too. But I think, again, there's this misconception, and we've been talking about it a lot just in the funds development community, that lower income communities don't have the capacity to give. When Black donors, we give. We just don't give to grassroots orgs, we give to churches. But those $5 donations add up, and every dollar counts. And I even tell people that all the time, we all have our place to play in the movement, right? My place is I raise the resources for the folks that are out there doing the work, right? So I'm not out there marching with the sign, but I'm going to help you buy that sign. I'm going to buy the sandwiches and the water and the gas for the bus and all of that, right? So we all have our place to play in the movement. And so I just think that we need to think more outside of the box. I wish there could be more collaborations between church groups and grassroots orgs. I honestly feel like churches don't have the infrastructure to be able to navigate some of the issues that are affecting our communities now too. And so I wish there would be more collaboration in that sense.
Yeah. And you brought up the support thing. The first thing I thought about was like John Lewis was giving all the speeches, but Julian Bond was the dude that made sure that the press showed up, And so everybody, like you said, has their role to play. So let's talk about your organization, Black Girls Do Politics. Talk about the
Yeah.
organization, talk about the podcast.
Yeah, so we actually, it was me and a good coworker of mine, Renee Smith. We decided to found Black Girls Do Politics in 2020 because we just felt like there wasn't necessarily a space for us to talk politics, and it wasn't, a space where it felt relative, right? Like, being a Black woman of a certain age, either you could, and again, love Joanne Reed, love, some of those other folks, even love, again, our co-founder, Latasha Brown, was, well known in the political space, but felt like as a younger generation of Black women, like, where is our voice, right? And then a lot of what we really kind of were experiencing just through our work with Black Voters Matter is just, and even just me and my conversations with my own family and my own friends, it's just feeling like people feel like politics is above them, right? Like they don't necessarily, it's hard for them to grasp, and it's hard to grasp how it really is intersectional with your day-to-day life. And so wanting to provide a space where, people could come and we could talk about politics in a way that makes sense to folks our age, but then also to provide, part of the organization is not just, of course, a podcast, right? We actually have a 501c3 and a C4 because we wanted to provide opportunities for Black women to become involved in politics in some way, but not necessarily as running as a politician, right? I think that sometimes we think that the only way you can become involved in politics is running for office. And that's totally not true, right? I do funds development work, and I'm very active in politics in my work, and I'm not a politician, right? You can be a director of operations for a political campaign. You can be a social media director for a communication campaign, a communication specialist. There's so many different things that you can do in the political spectrum. And I feel like these are careers or even opportunities that aren't presented to us as a community. I kind of fell into funds development work. And I found that generally, it's not a lot of diversity in it. There's been recent strides to try to address that in the last few years, especially, of course, with George Floyd. It's been addressed in numerous industries. But I still find that, it's not very many folks who do what I do who are people of color. And so wanted to actually provide an opportunity for some of these careers to be introduced to people who may want to be interested into them. And so, we've been working to provide fellowships for folks in all different aspects of politics. So whether it's working, as an intern on a political campaign or doing a social media page or even learning development work or running how to operate a political campaign, we've been working with different organizations and candidates to try to provide these fellowships where anyone of any age, because I think that's important too, being a woman who's had to reinvent herself a few different times, I feel like it's never too late to start. So if you're a 45-year-old woman who says, I want to get involved in politics, maybe I want to do this, providing a fellowship for you just as much as someone who's 25, who's like, I just graduated from college and I'm interested in, pursuing some kind of career in politics. So yeah, that's what Black Girls Do Politics is all about. This year, we're really honestly been thinking about expanding the organization's reach to include Black men. And so we're really thinking about launching Black Men Do Politics because, of course, there's been a lot of focus on Black women, which not that it shouldn't be, but, we definitely feel like Black men need to be included more in these conversations. And I feel as a Black mother, a Black wife, we are the ones who kind of shepherd y'all in these spaces, right? And so we need to make more openings for y'all to be involved in these spaces. I feel like Black men don't yet realize their political power. And, that's kind of what we want to, focus on this year is us as Black women. How can we lift y'all up in the space to recognize your political power?
Well,
so yeah.
Yeah, well, that's interesting that you closed out with that, because my next question to you was, there seems to be an incredible emphasis on getting more Black women in politics. Why is that? And I prefaced that by saying I represented a district for 9 years, and that district, up until this November, I was the only man to ever represent that area. It was, I was, a woman preceded me and a woman succeeded me, right? And you know, and like I said, and now this young brother whose mom was the representative, now he's going to serve in that seat. But in January, but it's like, I grew up with Curtis Collins in Chicago and Dorothy Tillman, and Faye Waddleton was the president of Planned Parenthood, and I did Barbara Jordan and Yvonne Burke, and all these. I just remember all these sisters that were getting elected in, I was growing up, and it was just, as I was growing up in the political realm, just to be in meetings and having breakfast with these people, So to me, it was always like, but black women have always been kind of involved in politics, just like in the church. Black women really run the church outside of the pastor. And if there's a female pastor, well, there it is. But, black women have always, to me, have really had a prominent role. And, now with the Black Girl Magic and all this stuff, now it just seems like, okay, well, we're really focusing in on that. So it was interesting that you made an observation. It's like, we might need to get these brothers more involved. Talk to me about that perception that's out there, and a little more.
I mean, yeah, I have, brothers and good guy friends, and I have a son, and just talking to all of them. I mean, even the conversations, my son will be 24 this year. And so even the conversations I was having with him in 2020, were kind of alarming to me, right? I was like, well, what are you thinking about, who you going to vote for president? And mind you, he's really fourth generation political family, right? My family is based out of Chicago as well. And so my grandparents were activists, my parents were activists, and then, I grew up canvassing, right? My parents started their first chapter with NAACP in the small town in Ohio that I'm from. So I'm just like, he's growing up in a very politically active civil rights, social justice family. And so just talking to him, and he was like, yeah, my friends are going to either vote for Kanye or Trump. I'm like, well, wait, what? What do you mean Kanye or Trump? This is even how I raised you. And just realizing that, no, what are you talking about? Right? I raised you right in all the other ways. You're Ohio State fan, you polite to women, but Kanye or Trump? What are you talking about? But, just talking to him and realizing that no one was talking to black men in that way, right? He's like, well, yeah, Kanye is talking to me, and Trump is the only, guy on Twitch. I was talking to two, we did with Black Voters Matter, we did a bus tour in 2021 called the Freedom Ride Tour, where we actually recreated the Freedom Rides. We went from the South to the North and held a big rally in DC. And so it was at dinner with some brothers who came on the tour, some young brothers. They probably were in their mid-20s to late 20s, maybe early 30s, one of them. And I said, well, why are so many, brothers rocking with Trump? What is that about? And they said a couple of different things, right? He addressed one thing that's, prevalent on, I think most black men's mind, which is criminal justice reform, right? Where other people weren't talking about it. Not only did he talk about it, he brought in rappers. Again, he was very good at identifying with the culture. When I talked to those brothers, they said that Trump was the only one who was advertising on Twitch, which, if you're familiar with Twitch, it's a gaming platform. And even that was something I had done some research into the year before that, in 2020, because doing research, I was 60% of black men aged 18 to 35 on a gaming system, 60%. And then I thought about having my own son and how it's a rite of passage for a black man to talk about when he got his first gaming system, right? Every brother can tell you when he got that first, whether it's an Atari from back in the day or whether it's a PlayStation 4 now, they know when they got that first gaming system. So I just feel like there's a lot of different, ways that we can engage them in the process, and we're not engaging them. And I feel like we're missing out on a very big, people are recognizing it now, but a very big slice of political power that we haven't, engaged or empowered, right, in that way. And I think that Donald Trump recognized it, right, in 2020, which is why he specifically, he was the one on Twitch, right? He was the one bringing in rappers erasing their sentences and touting criminal justice reform. So I think he recognized it. And I think people are recognizing it now when they saw how many Black and Latino men, voted for Trump. And then now, of course, talking to folks on the ground and hearing about how many more of them, are leaning towards Trump. I think people are recognizing it. Black Voters Matter in itself, we were just given a grant by Black Futures Lab to invest in our programs for, Black men this year. And what we're doing is a variety of different things that are, of course, banking on the intersectionality of reaching them where they are. We're doing a gaming tournament, right? We've done one before in the past. It was a virtual. We'll be doing some online gaming tournaments with our bus. We'll be doing some, engagement at sports bars, right? So we're tailgating, just different ways we can meet, and not the regular barbershop, conversations, because that's something we kind of heard. Part of what we did when we were applying for this grant was, talk to brothers on the ground and ask them, like, where's, Black Voters Matter is one of our core mantras is to lift up the leadership of Black women. So we're 80% women, but we have a Black men group in the org. And so our grants manager, who's a brother, got the group together and said, hey guys, like, where can we reach? Where would you want to be approached at? How can we engage the community more? And they were actually so excited that someone asked them, right? That someone even engaged them in that conversation. And so I just think that, from what I've seen on the ground in my own personal life, we've got to start, because I feel like y'all want to talk, right? Y'all want to engage. Y'all want to have a voice. We just haven't been asking y'all. And I think now we recognize we need to, because, your power, you guys have power too. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So, and that's good. I mean, that's really, really great to hear. So let's close this out by you giving a testimony. Why is politics so important to you? I mean, you could have you could have stayed in the corporate world. You could have, made that money and just lived that lifestyle and all that kind of stuff. Why did you decide that politics was important enough for you to get more engaged?
So I will say part of it is my background. Like I mentioned, I'm third generation political family. My parents were civil rights. Our mother was in SNCC. They started the first chapter of NAACP. My mother was the first Black Board of Education member in the town that I'm from. She helped me start a Black student union in my high school. So I came from a politically engaged family. But for me, I would say personally, what really kind of got me into nonprofit work and politics in particular is that I was directly affected by it. So I worked for AT&T. I started working for AT&T when I was in college, and I got laid off in 2005 after 9 years of working there. And part of the reason why I got laid off in 2005 is that George Bush was elected president again in 2004. And he had decided not to renew the Telecommunications Act of 1996 that Bill Clinton had passed. And when he decided not to renew that Telecommunications Act, AT&T, I was doing B2B sales with them at the time, and they were focused on moving into local because that's still when Bell South and, you had those companies that were handling the local services. When they didn't renew that Telecommunications Act through Congress, AT&T couldn't go into local anymore and had to lay off, close my whole office. So I literally saw directly how a politician's decision affected my life, right? So that was the first time I was laid off. And then that was 2005. I was a trade show account manager for 3 more years. And then the big recession hit. And then I was laid off again, right? And I felt like, I had worked so hard for all these corporations. I had done all, what I was supposed to do, went to college, got a good job, stayed there, and been laid off twice and didn't have anything to show for that. So where was the investment in me and my community when I had invested so much of myself into these other companies? And so that's kind of how I got into switching over to funds development. I was trying to figure out what to do next. I've been doing sales in corporate, for all this time, and account management. I'd always been a writer and had a friend that said, you should take a grant writing class. And I was like, yeah, maybe I should. And started grant writing, and here I am 15 years later. But I say all that to say is that it is all intersectional, right? Politics is local. And you think that voting for your president doesn't affect you, that affected me, right? Just as voting for my mayor can affect me, just voting for my school board member can affect me, my city council person, my public service commissioner, all of that affects me. So, yeah, that's my mantra. I'm going to keep preaching it.
Amen, sister. Amen. So tell people how they can get in touch with you, your organizations, all that stuff.
Sure, you can find Black Girls Do Politics. We're on all the social media. So it's Instagram, social media, Instagram, IG, X, I guess now, even though we don't, participate much on X anymore. And we're actually about to start dropping new podcasts this year. And so, in the next couple of weeks, you should definitely start to gain some episodes from us this year. As well as we're about to start recruiting for fellows for this year too. And so we're looking forward to being able to launch that program in 2024, relaunch it in 2024. And then you can always find me on LinkedIn. I'm Alexis Buchanan Thomas on LinkedIn. I'd love to engage about politics, love to also support folks in their endeavors. So definitely reach out.
Well, Sister Alexis, I appreciate you coming on. Again, I'm honored to have you on the podcast, and just keep doing what you're doing because we need it. We need it. And I greatly appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. And thanks again for providing this voice. Like I said before, we all have a place to play in the movement. So just even providing the space where people can, get on and hear folks talk about these issues is a part of the movement too. So thank you.
All right. All right, guys, we're going to catch y'all on the other side. All right, and we are back. So, as I close out, I just want to thank my guests for coming on. What a cool show. One of the privileges of being able to do this podcast is being able to meet people who are doing the things. Some you may have seen on the news, some you may not have. But they're doing what needs to be done at all different levels to make sure that society is better for all of us, especially those of us in the African American community, but primarily as Americans as a whole. And, everybody's got to play their part. I'm doing my part being a little old podcaster, So just understand that we're all in this together. And no matter how trivial you think your contribution may be, a man once said that, when you throw a pond in a lake, each one of those ripples has an effect on the entire lake. So no matter how big your ripple is, keep doing what you're doing. And together we're going to make it through. Not just 2024, but beyond. All right, guys. Thanks for listening. Until next time.